And we are now moving on to our step number 4, which is to box any evidence that the author uses to support any claims or assertions. As some of you might have already noticed, and you might have pointed out in your summaries, I know in our discussion this is one of the main things that comes up, is that the author doesn't provide very much credible evidence at all. So that becomes one of the issues for most of my students when we are discussing this. But let me go ahead and give you a few minutes and go ahead and see if you can find any evidence at all from paragraphs. You go ahead and go through any of the paragraphs at this point, since we've been going through it now over and over, and see if you find any evidence. So anything that it's trying to support her assertions concerning alcohol or the related issues with it, you can go ahead and box it. You can draw a box all the way around if it's one sentence, or if it's 2 or 3 even, if it's an entire paragraph. Go ahead and box what you think is appropriate for it. As a small hint, as was mentioned in the modules page, often but not always, the evidence is usually right next to the assertions, meaning that either it comes right afterward in most cases, or maybe just a little bit afterward, maybe 1 or 2 sentences separating it, or sometimes right before it. But normally they're pretty close to each other. So go ahead, if you want to, you can pause the video at this point and go ahead and go through paragraphs 1 through 12 and see what evidence you might find, and you can put a box around it. I'll give you a couple minutes. Alright, so hopefully you were able to find maybe 2 or 3 examples at least. And again, I would ask my class to volunteer some of the evidence. And of course, at this point, I'll just go ahead and point out what I normally have had them point out in our class situations. One of them that they point out right away is the numbers here in paragraph 2. You'll see her use of some numbers. And in this case, again, since I have a Word document here now instead of the PDF, it's not easy for me to box anything. It doesn't allow it, so I'll be highlighting it again. So maybe this part here, brewers spend more than $600 million a year on radio and TV commercials, and another $90 million on print ads. That normally is one that my students find, and I'll make that into a different color so you can see the difference between the yellow and the blue. So this could be the boxing now. So that would go as evidence because it's trying to show you some amount of figures, in this case money, of how much is being spent there. And a lot of times I would ask my students to describe the significance of that. And usually they'll point out that $600 million is quite a large amount. It's not that they spent $10 million or $60 million. It's $600 million a year on these radio and TV commercials, which is obviously a big amount. And then they also normally see right below that, in addition, the liquor industry spends about $230 million a year on print advertising. And again, I'll highlight that, and that would be a box as well. And we can see there that it goes with numbers and data that goes into her trying to prove and support some of her assertions. And the assertion, of course, was earlier, maybe here's one, that it's not an accident that some of this advertising and some of this, some of the issues that are present with, especially young people in high school, especially drinking, having problems, is related to how much money is being spent into our public knowledge here. Later on, we do see some more. That was a good one there in paragraph 2. We do see a little more on this page over here, one that is often brought up, although there's for one reason or the other. Drinking, in paragraph number 9, drinking plays a role in over 6 million injuries each year, not counting automobile accidents. And here we get to a good point where a few of my students start pointing out that, well, that sounds like a good amount, it sounds like evidence, but normally they start pointing out that they would like to have heard, where is the study coming from? Is it from a survey? Is it from a reputable source? Is it her just bringing up her own research? A lot of times they ask about that, and that's usually a good question that comes up, that comes into our discussion. And one other one right above here in paragraph 7, like all alcohol, it lowers the levels of male hormones in men and female hormones in women. Also, again, people like to ask, where exactly is that coming from? Who is it that made that study? Is it somebody reputable? How do we know for sure that that is a something we can trust and believe? And of course, there's a couple more throughout. I'll just point out those 3 so you have a chance to look around some more in case you were stuck at some point. Steps 3 and 4 usually are the trickier ones, especially the assertions in step 3. Trying to figure out what is an assertion and what isn't. It just takes some practice, and after a while, my students normally start getting better at it after a while. Same with step 4 here, finding the evidence that corroborates it. So that was the first 4 steps. We're down to our last step, number 5, and that'll be up on the last video coming up.